Hello, I'm Org and this is my review of the A6M5 the Japanese Tier 6 fighter. I found this aircraft to be difficult to do well in, but fun to fly regardless. But before I get into that, I'll talk a bit about this aircraft's history. Now, the A6M5 story begins with the decline of Japanese superiority in the skies over the Pacific. In the early months of the war, the A6M2 and 3 were able to outclass the inexperienced Allied pilots. However, those pilots soon developed tactics to counter the rise in, and once new aircraft like the P-38 F6F and F4U started arriving in the theatre, the Japanese were well outclassed. The A6M5 was an attempt to upgrade the Zero so that it could again be competitive. The various A6M5 variants all came along with more robust wings to increase dive speed. Why can't I say that? Anyway, increased dive speed. They had bigger engines to improve rate of climb and speed, and more powerful guns. Some of these aircraft even came with armour plating and self-sealing fuel tanks, features which had been very lacking in previous iterations of the Zero design. However, these improvements came at a cost. Mainly, the aircraft's operational range was reduced significantly. However, since Japan was well and truly on the defensive by this point in the war, this reduction was probably well worth the gain in combat performance. The entry of the A6M5 was not enough to make a significant impact on the war in the Pacific. Frankly, the quality of the equipment was not the most important strategic weakness of the Japanese in 1943. The A6M5 was produced in fairly large numbers for a Japanese aircraft, but insignificant numbers compared to what the Americans were churning out. This was coupled with the increasingly poorly trained air and ground crews, and the difficulty Japan had in producing and transporting parts to the front line, meant that the A6M5 was never going to be a war-winning aircraft. However, that is not to say that it was not a good aircraft. When handled well, it could prove to be a match for the advanced American designs. The most famous instance is when one of the Japanese leading aces, Sakai Saburo, approached 15 F6F Hellcats after mistaking them for friendly fighters. In a dogfight that lasted for 20 minutes, Saburo managed to not only survive, but he also managed to shoot down 2 of the Hellcats. When he arrived back at the airfield, his aircraft did not have a single bullet hole in it. This kind of success was not common for the A6M5. While stationed on Iwo Jima, almost all of the A6M5s in Saburo's wing were shot down, mostly in engagements with Hellcats. In World of Warplanes, I think the A6M5 feels very similar to how I imagined it in history. That is, that excellent pilots can do very well in this aircraft, while average pilots, like myself, will tend to get torn apart. The A6M5 is a low-altitude turn fighter, and a very good low-altitude turn fighter, but it's in a tier with a lot of excellent energy fighters such as the P-51A, the 109F and the Messerschmitt 410. In my experience, the main trick of flying the A6M5 is to maintain situational awareness and not get into situations that aren't to your advantage, which of course is easier said than done. The great strength of the A6M5 is its manoeuvrability, particularly its turn time, which is better than any other aircraft in this tier. Only the Yak-1N can come close. Its rate of roll is a bit lacking, but not awful. However, to balance this out, the A6M5 has very few hit points, so you had better use its manoeuvrability to quickly get out of the way of bullets. The main weakness of the A6M5 is in its airspeed characteristics. In every statistic, it is average to poor. Most aircraft in this tier can climb or dive away from the A6M5, or even just fly straight and level to escape. Coupled with this, the A6M5 has a low optimum altitude of 1250 metres, and flight performance drops off very quickly above 2000 metres, which is the altitude range where most of the initial encounters take place at this tier. In terms of armament, the A6M5 is actually a bit weaker than most of the aircraft in this line. When fully upgraded, it gets two 20mm cannons and two heavy machine guns, but at this tier, that's kind of an average armament setup. Well, in almost every other tier, the Japanese fighters actually have very good firepower. I'm kind of loath to give advice on how to fly the A6M5, as it's the first aircraft I've flown that I was genuinely bad at. After 170 battles, my win rate was a miserable 46%, and I averaged killing only 0.89 aircraft per battle, although once you add in my 44 assists, this gives an adjusted kills per battles of just over 1. Oddly enough, my average damage output per game was 300, which is actually fairly decent considering this aircraft only gets 200 hit points. Clearly I was just not great at turning my damage output into kills or my kills into wins. A lot of these results can be explained by a 20-something game losing streak I had in this aircraft over the course of about 3 weeks in November. That was just never balanced by a 20-game winning streak, but that ignores that a big part of the reason why I lost all those games was that I found it difficult to use the A6M5 effectively. Simply put, I just don't have the focus to maintain situational awareness, or the patience to not be overly aggressive while flying this aircraft. Looking at battle tactics, I feel that the A6M5 is weak in the opening moments of engagement. As I said earlier, it has poor rate of climb and altitude performance, so generally enemy aircraft will be above you, and it may be difficult to avoid their attacks if you're at an altitude similar to theirs. For this reason, I had the best results from my A6M5 hanging back a bit and, off to the side, just lurking around the edges, then entering the dogfight once it was already started. Many players will pick out the A6M5 early on if it is near the front, since the low hit points means that this aircraft can be killed fairly quickly if the pilot does not avoid the attack. Really, avoiding enemy attacks should be your focus for the first moments of the battle. The mid-game is the A6M5's strength. Ideally what you want to do is slip onto the tail of a manoeuvring enemy. They will not have the energy to escape you quickly, and your guns will erode their health since they will not be able to turn out of your line of fire. The only real concern is if an enemy starts taking shots at you. However, it's always possible to break off and re-engage at a later time. Like always, you want to preserve your hit points while doing as much damage to the enemy. Despite the low hit points of the Zeros, they actually have decent survivability since it can get out of the fire of enemy aircraft so quickly. In the end game, I also find the A6M5 to be a bit weak. It is the slowest fighter of this tier, so every other aircraft can engage and disengage with you at will. This means that the enemy will be able to choose where you fight an engagement, and you will struggle to disengage if they do not want you to. Occasionally I got lucky in that the last remaining aircraft were at a lower altitude than me, so I could, pick the terms of the engagement, or they were foolish enough to try and turn with me, but more often than not the situation was the exact opposite. I'll just finish off by discussing some of the manoeuvres I found useful in this aircraft. At first I used a lot of descending defensive spirals. If an aircraft was approaching me, I would put the A6M5 into a shallow dive and turn underneath the enemy's guns. If they tried to follow me down, they would always overshoot. This is a product of the low dive speed and tight turning radius of the A6M5. Basically, every other aircraft would be travelling outside the circle I was making and at a much higher speed than me, so they'll quickly end up in front of you after about a turn and a half. However, I kind of stopped using that manoeuvre because when the enemy did not follow me down, I'd lost a lot of energy, in this case mainly potential energy. I'd lost altitude, and because they didn't come down with me, I was now just lower than them for no advantage, and I had to climb back up to the dogfight, which is never a good position to be in. Instead, my go-to move for defending against an enemy aircraft at similar altitude to mine was an offensive barrel roll, in that I turn to face the enemy and essentially do a barrel roll around their line of fire. The trick is to time the turn at the end of the barrel roll so that you end up on the enemy's tail at short range. They will of course be travelling much faster than you because you've just done this manoeuvre. So you won't be able to stay on their tail for too long. So you want to kind of maximise the length of time you can shoot at them as possible. Related to this is a defensive barrel roll, which can also be useful, although it's a bit more risky. Just because this aircraft has a low speed and a low stall speed, it's kind of possible to just jam on the flaps and cut back the throttle and do a barrel roll, which can cause fast enemies coming up behind you to overshoot. But a horizontal turn is safer, I'd say, definitely, and is probably about as successful in getting onto enemies' tails. It just takes a bit longer. When fighting aircraft at high altitudes, the trick is to avoid, well, obviously avoid as much of their fire as possible and counterattack for as long as you can after they have passed. And you basically just want to try and avoid stalling and use your radar, use your mini-map to spot their attacks coming in and dodge them as best you can. And as I said, don't stall. If you stall, you're going to die because it just takes too long to recover in any aircraft and they'll be able to turn around and just destroy you. If possible, you want to draw the enemy down to increase your manoeuvrability, and it also increases your engine power, so you'll be able to dodge easier and counterattack for longer. However, I was never great at defeating enemy aircraft this way, but it's not impossible to do so if you're alone. However, if you're not alone, it's actually kind of not easy, but it's a lot easier, because while the enemy's attacking one of your allies, you, or your ally if they're attacking you, will be able to get a nice long burst into the enemy as they pass. So, it just makes it a lot easier. So really what I'm trying to say there is that if it's kind of a 2-on-1 fight and the enemy's above you, just try and stick within 500 or 600 metres of your teammate, so that if they come under fire, you can help them out, and if you come under fire, they can help you out. As I said way back at the beginning of this video, the trick to flying this aircraft is to maintain situational awareness. Use the mini-map and radar to spot attacks before the bullets start flying past you, and try to stay unnoticed until you are on someone's tail. Also, if at all possible, avoid tail gunners and AA guns. Those things will tear you apart in no time flat. As you just saw, I lost probably 60% of my health to that IL-2T's tail gunner. And that's basically my last piece of advice for the A6M5. And we're just going to finish out this game by running and hiding, because that F4U Corsair last I saw was at way higher altitude than me, and I do not want to fight that in that situation unless I really have to. And since I didn't, I didn't. Anyway, this is the final replay I want to show you, and well, it was one of the few games I had played with the new matchmaking, so you can see it's fairly unbalanced. Well, 2-tier spread, 6, 5 and 4. We've got 2 heavy fighters to the enemy's 3. And one of them is a Messerschmitt 410, which you might have heard me mention earlier, can be a bit of trouble for the A6M5 if it's flowing well. And well, this is kind of an interesting game. Well, it will end up being an interesting game because in the first moments of it, I thought we'd basically lost. If you look at the minimap, you can see one aircraft on our team is charging off straight ahead by itself. And that is our Beaufighter, who proceeds to attack ground targets and basically get the entire enemy team on its tail, well, more or less, and basically kind of forces my team into a situation where we can either abandon it or try and help it by fighting at low altitude above the enemy's AA guns. And I was feeling a bit indecisive here. You can see kind of the other fighters on my team, they're all actually at fairly low altitude, only 2,000 metres. And we've kind of all decided to go in, but we're so far behind and that guy's just racing off that, yep, it dies, we can't do anything. So I decided I've had enough of this and I'm turning back to get away from the AA guns. But then I see the Messerschmitt 410s coming at me. So I do... Well, that wasn't really a manoeuvre, it was kind of a downward defensive spiral, but not really. And we kind of see what's happened here is the guys tried to follow me down, and well, that was about half a turn. I managed to get on its tail, just because, like I said, it was going way faster than me, and it can't turn anywhere near as tight as me. And it dies quickly. So like I said, that pretty much was the downward defensive spiral that I was talking about. It only works if people follow you down. If that guy hadn't have, he would have just powered away, been even higher. Well, he would have gone from being at the same altitude as me to being above me, which would have just put myself in a worse position. But I got lucky in that it was foolish enough to try and turn with me. If you're flying an aircraft that's not a Zero, don't try and turn with a Zero. But, well, it's a 2-on-3 at the moment. Myself and a MiG-3, we decided to kind of not dive into the enemy's AA at low altitude. As I said, it will tear me apart pretty quickly, and that MiG-3 is a tier lower than me, so we're probably even worse off for it. But the problem here is that the enemy's actually winning on superiority by 2 points. So eventually, they will win. And myself and the MiG-3, we're not really great at ground attacks, so pretty soon we're going to have to go and shoot down enemy aircraft. Luckily, an enemy aircraft starts strafing ground targets directly underneath me. I roll invert to try and spot it, but instead spot the other two fighters, which also tells me that it's the Messerschmitt 110 that's strafing ground targets. I decide to go after the 110 because, again, I don't really want to fight over the enemy's AA. It would be pretty bad in this aircraft. So dive down this 110. That MiG-3 on my team kind of thought the opposite of me, and it's gone and engaged the two fighters. So I decide I've got to go there and help that guy. I need to keep him alive. And well, I go head on with this A6M2 because I can. I know I can survive. I put the fire out. Well, I don't, because I've got automatic fire extinguishers in this thing. I just realised I had about 100 of them sitting in my depot, so I should use them. And then straight onto the tail of the 110. And it's dead. And the last enemy aircraft left is the 109E. So it's just turned from a 3-on-2 to a 2-on-1. And again, Messerschmitt 109 is trying to turn flight with a Zero. And well, it's not going to end well for it. And I think I've wrecked its engine as well there, so it's... And it's under anti-aircraft fire, but yeah, you're dead. Anyway, that's the A6M5. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all next time.